Hello? Hello. Today, we're talking about Hello Neighbor, and if you're wondering why I'm on the phone, it's because you've locked me out. Can you let me in? There's like a bunch of foes trying to get me or something. Thanks. As I was saying, Hello Neighbor is an indie horror game, developed by DynamicPixels, a Russian video game company. They made mostly mobile games and are behind hit games such as Hungry Cats and Piggy, but DynamicPixels were too small for such an ambitious project like Hello Neighbor. In 2013 to 2014, the idea was basically to make an indie horror game, but with a unique AI system. I'll elaborate on the AI later in the video, but the gist of it is, the neighbor is capable of gathering all the information regarding the movements, actions, and decisions of the player. The AI then analyzes the data to come up with ways to counter what the player does, which could range from placing bear traps around entrances you've been through before to a bucket of water above a door. Point being, they needed some form of financial support, so they started a Kickstarter campaign, which flopped, only making $12,000 of the requested $100,000 goal. Then enter Tinybuild, a video game publisher who had more than enough equity to support DynamicPixels' new IP, so Hello Neighbor officially entered development. As stated previously, the game started its development between 2013 and 2014, so without the influence of games like Five Nights at Freddy's. It was a totally original idea at the time, the core idea being you had to break into the neighbor's house, stealth and puzzle solving your way into finding out what was in the neighbor's basement, all while the neighbor is trying to stop you. The main selling point of the game was arguably the neighbor's unique AI. If the neighbor didn't know you were in his house, he would be in idle mode, where he would do all the regular things someone would do. Watch TV, take a shower, go to sleep, have a wank. If you happen to knock something over or are too loud, the neighbor would enter hunt mode, where he would do anything in his power to find you and kick you out of his house. In attack mode, the neighbor knows exactly where you are and is actively pursuing you. He might block you off or even cut you off to catch you quicker. Finally, offline mode is when the neighbor is setting up traps and finding ways to make it harder for you to enter his house. Bear traps, boarding up windows, security cameras, etc. The neighbor will analyze how often you come to a specific location in the house and predict where you'll be going next. It's actually amazing how a dev team that would typically make mobile games was taking on this project. Watch this clip from the early test footage of the games and tell me it doesn't hook you. The point is, DynamicPixels had a powerful concept and incredible potential with its unique art style and gameplay. And so, in September of 2016, the pre-alpha for the game was released to the public. There isn't much to note about the pre-alpha, as it was more of an unpolished version of Alpha 1, but what it did do was hold true to its original concept, and you got to see the neighbor's AI in person. It wasn't perfect, as it was nowhere near done, but it showcased the dev's passion for the game, and its strong capabilities that could be utilized later down the line. A month later, in October of 2016, Alpha 1 of Hello Neighbor was released, but DynamicPixels couldn't just bank on the game releasing and hoping it would take off. They decided to come up with a plan to take advantage of the horror gaming scene on YouTube. So they reached out to Let's Players like Markiplier and Jacksepticeye to play their game, and they did, and it worked. As you can see, based off of Google Trends for the game, when Markiplier and Jacksepticeye's videos released in October, search terms for Hello Neighbor exploded. But let's actually talk about Alpha 1. The game starts off with a cute little intro sequence, helping the player get used to the mechanics of the game and letting you know that the neighbor is somewhat suspicious of your arrival. This alpha is not very good. It's very glitchy, the physics are whack, the neighbor's AI was a bit all over the place, and the platforming was really bad. Though, with all these flaws in mind, I would actually say this is the best version of the game ever. This and the pre-alpha actually feel like stealth horror games. The house is small and tight, so you really think the neighbor could be around every corner. The neighbor in this version is also pretty competent. He actually knows the layout of the house, which makes sense because it is his house. The AI is great at cutting you off. The way he places traps around the house are great. It really makes you think twice about what your next move will be, and the sound design and overall atmosphere of the game is pretty good. Not being overly cartoony, but also not taking itself too seriously either. It's a good mix of both, which I really enjoyed. And that final ending of getting caught and then being buried alive is a perfect way to keep people thinking. But then, after Alpha 1, things things just went downhill. In Alpha 2, your player actually has a model, which I do not like. Your hand is in the way all the time, like dude, move your hand, oh my god. Also, the intro sequence has been changed a lot. The breaking and entering sequence was executed in a very unnatural way and was just overall uninteresting compared to when you would break in yourself. The house is also now way too cartoony and over the top and doesn't take itself very seriously anymore. Also, that ending was absolute arse. You go into the basement and then you get met with the title sequence. I know it was to hype up the rest of the game, like, oh, what's in the basement, but to me it just felt so odd, and it only gets worse from here. Alpha 3 was where everything just fell apart. First things first, the house is massive, which isn't a good thing because the neighbor's AI was not made in mind for this house. There are places in the house that the neighbor can't even reach. Once you've made it to a certain point in the game, he becomes more of an annoyance than a scary antagonist. And it also doesn't help that the neighbor's jump scare animation was removed completely. The only thing more annoying than the neighbor is the puzzles and platforming. It actually baffles me that they decided to use the worst aspects of the previous alphas. Overall, it's just an even buggier and glitchier unpolished mess. And wouldn't you know, it gets even worse. Alpha 4, the final alpha before the official release, is just an absolute joke. The neighbor is now just useless. He doesn't do anything. Remember when this game was supposed to be a stealth horror game with a cool unique AI system? Well, they threw that away for lore? They added these nightmare sequences that would sometimes play when you get caught by the neighbor, and this is where Five Nights at Freddy's influence truly shines through. In Five Nights at Freddy's 2, you would have some cool 8-bit retro minigame when you die. It was to progress the story for Five Nights at Freddy's in a really cool and brilliant way, expanding on the lore and mystery. Of course, at the point we are now with Five Nights at Freddy's, is it convoluted? For sure, yeah, but people love a good story. It gets people hooked. The death minigames in FNAF 2 that very rarely ever occur kept people speculating in a very good way. Scott Cawthon left enough planned and thought out puzzle pieces to give the player a general idea of what's happening. Seeing the purple guy running towards you and the puppet telling you to save them, and then in the bottom corner it says you can't, that gets my gears turning. That gets me excited of the idea that I found something important to this ever-evolving story. And Hello Neighbor executes this in the most shallow and uninteresting way ever. It's crazy to compare Alpha 1 and Alpha 4 to see how ugly and unpolished it became, but development would soon come to an end, as in December of 2017, the official game was released to the public.
Oh. Nothing. What the?
Wait, I give you a lawnmower bat. Oh shit! What the fuck? Oh shit! Oh!
We just came out of Blight Town and we're back in Firelink Shrine. What?
Whoa!
What the fuck?
No. $30.
It was really bad. So let's tear into and bully this game the way God intended. The game is broken up into 3 acts. Act 1 follows some kid with the worst case of chicken legs I've ever seen, and he's kicking his beach ball in the middle of the road. Alright. There's a really rough transition from cutscene to gameplay, and after hearing some fishy things going on in your neighbor's house, you go see what the commotion is all about. He appears to be locking someone up in his basement with a face of despair and sadness as he does it. He eventually catches you by jumping out of his window and throws you across the street, where you're left solving puzzles and platforming your way into finding the secrets in the basement. This act is the best act, which is strange to say because it isn't even that good. The game takes place in a smaller house and does a good job of holding true to its original concept, with the neighbor still being somewhat of a threat. Still, it's unpolished and a bit of a mess, making it feel more like an alpha of the game than an official game. There's also like no sense of direction on what to do in the game. I find myself aimlessly wandering around the house looking for things I don't know exist. If you completed the game without a tutorial, I'll give you $5. But this issue only comes out in the later acts. Once you've made your way into the basement, you find what seems to be where the neighbor's victim was living, with cardboard cutouts outside of windows portraying the outside world. Then you have a little chase scene with the neighbor, and are caught after reaching a door that has multiple locks on it. In Act 2, the player needs to escape the basement. Once you do, you realize the house has become enormous yet again, with the walls being boarded up and some barbed wire to top it off. This is all to stop a child from leaving his house, by the way. To escape, you have to do something unthinkable. Even Rick Sanchez couldn't solve this crazy and wacky puzzle. You escape by stacking up a couple of cardboard boxes and jumping over the fortified walls. technically this isn't the way you're actually supposed to do it, but I honestly couldn't care less. The proper way will give me a headache. Once you've escaped the neighbor's house, Act 3 commences, picking up with the kid, now an adult, moving back into his town and revisiting the neighbor's house. You see it's all run down and destroyed. After taking a nice little nap in your new house, you wake up to find the neighbor's house is back and bigger than ever, solving even more stupid puzzles and stupid platforming to reach the basement. Here, you find the neighbor is now really big, doing even more platforming to get into the house that is on the neighbor's back. Once you've entered the house, you're in essentially a final boss fight with this shadow demon thing, where you slowly grow greater in size as you protect your younger self from this previously mentioned shadow demon. Then, you wake up, revealing all of Act 3 was a dream. Oh boy, what a mess. The fatal flaws of the previous versions were embraced in the official release, with stupid and foolish puzzles, annoying and pointless platforming, and the lack of story progression. And just like Alpha 3 and 4, the aspects of stealth and the neighbor's AI were all put aside for stuff like this, with the neighbor no longer being a threat and with useless lore thrown in for the sake of it. Speaking of lore, the lore is so vague and lacks the capability of good storytelling through these dumb nightmare sequences. You can really tell they were trying so damn hard to get a game theory video made on them, that they forgot about the original aspects of the game that made it so intriguing in the first place. In the end, we got a game that tried to tell an overambitious and convoluted story, with too much focus on lore and capturing an audience it did not intend on capturing in the first place. You'd expect that a clunky mess like this would be received poorly. Well, you're wrong. Only the chat alpha males thought these games were bad, and the beta males, i.e. children, were in love with the game. After all, the game was a horror game for kids, like Poppy Playtime and Benny and the Ink Machine, with the mostly child fanbase sticking around for the future of the brand because it has a lore and mystery, with Tinybuild taking note of this, so they took advantage of it. After the game's release, and with a new audience of keen children, Tinybuild and DynamicPixels decide to make multiple spin-off games, a board game, a book series, Funko Pops, plushies, toys, a fucking TV show. So, let's go down the list. Hello Neighbor Hide and Seek was a prequel of sorts to the original game. It suffers from a lot of the same issues as the previous game, but I believe the sole purpose of it was to expand on the story for our dear friend the neighbor. You play as the neighbor's kid, playing a game with your brother. It tells a story in the background as you play pretend. You solve puzzles whilst your sibling tries to get you. It was a decent idea, expanding on the lore of the games. Secret Neighbor is actually decent? What? It's very reminiscent of games like Dead by Daylight and Among Us. Basically, one person is the secret neighbor who can transform from being a regular player into the neighbor and attack other players, all while stopping them from getting into the basement. It's decently well made, but I'm willing to bet that's probably because DynamicPixels didn't make it. Holograph did. It does an okay job of executing this idea, though when you play, you'll most likely be bombarded with screaming children, so I'd rather call my friend sus in Among Us. Hello Engineer. I have no idea what this is. From what I've read, it's essentially a game where you build cars and stuff. I don't know, I'm not playing it. There's also a board game made around the Secret Neighbor game. It doesn't look all that interesting, just the original game but on a table. They've made multiple books that they made just to follow in the footsteps of Five Nights at Freddy's. They were made to get money and appeal to children because, again, lore. And finally, the TV show pilot. It is, very cringe. The animation is fine, the dialogue is absolute arse, it's extremely unnatural and odd. The jokes don't land, but again, it wasn't made for me, it was definitely made for a younger demographic. I won't go too much into it because I'm secretly hoping it gets picked up for an entire season, then I can make a video about it. But I doubt that'll happen. The best thing by far about this show is that it spawned 3 tweets from the official Tinybuild Twitter account, basically begging MatPat to do a theory video on it. It's so strange to me, like, there isn't anything to even dissect in the pilot, like, what would you want him to talk about? The story? The story's us, bro. And we still aren't done, because god damn it, they decided to take it a step further, and make a sequel to the original game. Now, it's probably worth mentioning that Hello Neighbor 2 isn't actually out yet, instead being released sometime in December. But there are about 3 alphas to this game, and I'll be honest, after playing these games for myself, it ain't half bad. These games actually feel like stealth, breaking, and entering games, reminiscent of Alpha 1. But I think what gives me hope for this game is the refocus on the neighbor's AI. It takes a completely different approach from the previous games, with this little bird gremlin guy being another antagonist. It's far from perfect, but I'm optimistic. The graphics graphics have improved a ton, and the AI is a lot stronger and better. As for the story of the game, you play as a local journalist who's suspicious of his neighbor. Yeah, the same neighbor as before. Children have gone missing, and there have been rumors of children going into his house and never being heard from again. And so, you break into his house to uncover the truth of what's been happening. It's taking a different approach, which I like. A simple story instead of a convoluted mess. But I'll be keeping a level head when I eventually play the game, because I already know if I go in with a super optimistic mindset, I'll set myself up for disappointment. Also, the way they announced Hello Neighbor 2 was genuinely cool. They released the pre-alpha of the game titled Hello Guest, and it was part of an entire ARG thing that Tinybuild had mixed in with Secret Neighbor. To solve the ARG, you had to participate in Secret Neighbor events and piece together cryptic codes in the Secret Neighbor Discord server, with all this resulting in the announcement of Hello Neighbor 2. As of recording, Hello Neighbor 2 is set to release on December 6th for Xbox, PlayStation, PC, and Nintendo Switch, and upon release will be roughly $40 depending on where you live. In the end, we got a game that embraced its flaws in almost every way, going from being an interesting game with a unique AI system to an unfixable mess, sidelining the AI in stealth in place of useless lore and a story they weren't capable of telling, whilst losing its integrity and credibility along the way, wanting to hop on the hype train one last time instead of just sticking out the ride. Because what people don't realize is that it's a one-way ticket. If I had any advice for up-and-coming game developers, it would be to make the game you want and intend to make. And I know, chasing a trend can look appetizing because of all the money opportunities you can get, but don't do it. It won't be worth it in the end. You should always be focusing on making the best game you can possibly make. I think instead of looking at Hello Neighbor as the worst horror game imaginable, because it is. It's the worst horror game ever. That's a fact. We should look at it as a lesson of what not to do once your game is skyrocketed to life-changing heights. Honestly, I'm tired. I don't want to see Hello Neighbor again. Like, at all. I've been Risky, and I'll see you in the next video. Oh shit, the power went out. Hey, Freddy? I'm so fucking screwed.